Hello everyone and welcome to this Master of Applied Finance Masterclass. My name is Lindesay Brine. I'm the Director of the Master of Applied Finance and the associated courses, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them, their culture and elders past, present and future. Today I'd like to give you just a very brief introduction to the Master of Applied Finance and also one aspect of that, which is the Capstone unit. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then I'll introduce you to our alumni guest, Ben Gilbert, and we'll have hear from Ben about his career path and how the Master of Applied Finance has helped him. And then we'll settle into some questions. And let me start by saying that the aim of our course is to go beyond technical skills to help you to apply finance in a real world setting and enable you to succeed and support society. We want you to be seen as an authority, to be able to work in teams and to be able to communicate with influence to various stakeholders. Whether you're new to finance, looking to get into finance, or you want to deepen your financial knowledge, our postgraduate applied finance courses are designed to support you with skills and knowledge you can use in your day-to-day work and also to extend your career into the next area. One of the core units we offer is a capstone unit called Contemporary Issues in Applied Finance, where you select an issue which is important to you, you research it, present to groups on it, and then you write a report. It may sound a bit dry, but the aim is for you to bridge between academic research and application to a business context in an area which means something to you. It allows you to bring all of the concepts you learn in the core units together in one topic. Even better, many students have used the project to support a move into the next role, into a new job, or in some cases, their own consultancy businesses. The opportunity to try out and research ideas is important to your career development and is an essential part of the course. This capstone unit is just the start. Trying new ideas and concepts is important to our alumni speaker, Ben Gilbert. Ben has pursued a number of different roles over his career, and we are fortunate to have him with us today to talk about his career path and how the Master of Applied Finance fits into it. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself and also then give us an idea of where you've been and how the Master of Applied Finance has helped?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, for that introduction. And it's always good to hear about how the course has progressed, because I must admit, I started the course in 2002. And as I was thinking about what I would say, I kind of went back, wow, the world has changed in that time. And if you think about back then, it was before the iPhone was invented. You know, Foxtel was the only free-to-air alternative here in Australia. Internet banking kind of was only just starting in the form that we now know it. Email was the only way you really collaborated. Facebook didn't exist, and neither did LinkedIn, or was in the very, very early stages. Xero didn't exist. And also things have changed, not just around technology, but also around, as a society, the kind of the values that we hold. And, gender equality is now getting a lot more airtime at board level and at senior executive level inside of organisations. We're much more aware of the business case for investing in gender equality, not just for women, but for men also. Diversity, inclusion and environmental policies to stop global warming. So we've actually had quite a shift as well in the value sets and the things that we see as being important. I notice also that, you go back for the finance people, the S&P index was at 1,000 points. It seemed all the interest rates were at about 5%. The cash rate was 5%, the 10-year interest rate was 5%, LIBOR was coming down. It was coming down about 3% at that time. We had a dip because of the internet bubble, or the burst, but through the 90s it had been around that 5%. And really valuation parameters have changed significantly since then, and I don't think we've ever seen as big a divide between kind of public valuations and maybe theoretical valuations that you get out of discounted cash flows and book values and the different sorts of valuation parameters. There's a new theory of finance or a new theory of money that seems to be emerging, which is really interesting. But at the end of the day, and I know that we keep talking about technology companies, and it's everyone's sort of talking about technology, but they're no different. It's no different to bricks and mortars in that they're just basically delivering cash flows to investors. So at the end of the day, you've still got to get your head firmly on what is the investment opportunity. And I think we've seen, with Afterpay, there's some people that are benefiting very well out of the tech boom. So look, I guess I'll go back and start over. It was a long time that I did my Masters of Applied Finance. I did it in Sydney. I think my background was probably different back then to a lot of people that were doing it, in that I came from a corporate background. So I'd spent a lot of time, in the telecoms sector at Optus and AAPT when it was a startup with MCI Corp. Whereas most of the people at that time came from more traditional banking, funds management, equity research, and a bit of private equity. But what I found, the APFIN was very good for my career. And I think initially it was really positioning myself within Optus. So somebody with a Master of Applied Finance, I had a very high level of finance acumen compared to my peer group across Optus. And actually, believe it or not, compared to most people, it's surprising. Senior executives know kind of operational P&Ls, and they know EBITDA margins and cost structures. But when you kind of think about how you relate P&Ls to balance sheets to cash flows, and how does a discounted cash flow work, and all the mechanics of understanding how value is created, there are not many people in the corporate arena that really understand. And so the Master of Applied Finance was really good for positioning me within that organisation, and then subsequently within the industries and sort of things that I pursued. And I think what it allowed me to do, I guess I was an undergraduate BA, Bachelor of Arts, Psychology and Media, and had gone into telecoms in the early 90s. But what it had allowed me to do was to really get involved kind of in the sort of the strategy, the corporate development, and the M&A functions within Optus. And it was really just, it was amazing just doing the Masters of Applied Finance, the credibility that, it gave me. That was really useful. What it also gave me that obviously, took me a bit long to figure out was actually that it gave me a really strong framework for thinking about investment decisions and the impacts across the balance sheet, the P&L and the cash flows. And it's that kind of framework that's a very useful framework. It doesn't matter how big or small it is. It's just the same way of thinking about investment decisions. And that's very applicable in anything you're doing in any organisation. Anytime you need to spend some money, a large amount of money, or talk about going into new markets, there's always got to be some sort of financial consequence. And it's really critical to be able to understand what that consequence is for your organisation. And so, that was what the Master of Applied Finance really grounded me in. And it also helps you just in your everyday operational, elements, and, framing the way you think. So it's really heavily influenced the way I think throughout my career. And I've found that kind of very useful. So if I go back to my career path, because it's been non-conventional, I've kind of worked in, a number of industries. I've worked in telecoms. I started there in the early 90s with Optus. I worked in a variety of positions. And the sorts of things I did, I launched the first competitive DSL business at Optus. So right back in 2000s, when they opened up the local loop, which is now basically shut down and is not used anymore because of the change in technology. But that was an example of corporate venture capital Optus gave. We set out, I was in a project group. We ended up forming our own separate company that sat completely outside of Optus physically, and had its own business, AB and ACN. And Optus put $100 million into this business to take advantage of that new market that was opening up. I worked on a really big balance sheet restructure. There's a $250 million balance sheet restructure at NextGen, which was a company that was formed out of Macquarie and Deutsche Bank and Lucent Technologies to take advantage of the fibre intercapital market. So they built a fibre network, an 8,000 kilometre fibre network from Brisbane to Sydney to Canberra to Melbourne, and then across to Perth. And they literally just drilled a ditch 8,000 kilometres and put some fibre optic into it. And that was again when we were seeing that sort of that bubble burst in the telecom space at that stage. And so you had debt and equity who were banks, looking at this asset that they had invested in and not understanding the market. And so I came in and did the strategic review, ran the financial model, and then we made recommendations to the board on what to do. And that was as a balance sheet restructure. It was some M&A to potentially consolidate, the third tier telco space. And that was a super interesting time, working with the sort of the debt and the equity bankers who are kind of very different people. And my first real foray into kind of the boardroom, and just understanding how boards work and sort of the role of the chairman in that sort of function. I did a lot of M&A when I was at Optus, and we acquired the first. Well, we acquired a Perth company called Alpha West, which went on to become their beachhead into the ICT market here in Australia. And again, I was, at that stage young, I was doing the valuation and the business case for Optus. And that was, quite an exciting time in the telecom space. And the last thing I did in telecoms was a strategic review with McKinsey, where, we got 10 McKinsey consultants in, and there were 10 of us put into a Project X, and we had to review Optus business, which at that stage had about $2 billion in assets, $1.5 million in revenue, a couple of thousand employees, and it had been in a long price war with Telstra. And so, it was the P&L and the returns were being challenged. But also at that stage, we were really going in that first iteration of the technology shift, moving to, an all IP world, moving to apps and different ways of developing networks. So some really interesting stuff that we had to go through and really understand the financial impacts of technology at a kind of a really macro level for a big Australian business. And again, the applied finance was, really, again, helped me. I, ran business models and, looked at the, market strategies and worked on all packs for executive management. Really, really useful stuff. I then moved in 2005 was one of those points where I've been in telecom for a long time. The market wasn't going very well. And I thought, look, I'm either going to become a career telco person, or this is an opportunity to shift. And it was really interesting because what set me apart in my move was the experience I had working with engineers in technology fields for my career, but also the finance skills that I had. And so that was literally why AGL brought me into their organisation, was because at that stage they were looking at, they had gas and electricity assets. It was at the stage where we had that sort of 10-year drought, and they were looking to do a very big investment in recycled water. But they didn't have anyone within their business that could do the kind of the investment business case and the market analysis and help with all of the decks to get things through and reviewed. And so I came in there, and we literally, at that stage, AGL had they'd optimised the way they had delivered gas into metropolitan Sydney, and so they had a whole lot of unused gas mains in outer Western Sydney, near sort of Rose Hill. And so the idea was we put a recycle plant on one side of Western Sydney and the other, and then reline those gas pipelines and pump recycled water into all of the industrial businesses and their processes. And so that was a really interesting project to get involved with. And again, I led the investment business case for that, and also in the strategy about, where are we rolling out the network. And you kind of mentioned it. One of the key things that I think as a finance person is to understand the business benefits, not only just understand, but actually then able to quantify them. in a way that's meaningful for the organisation. And that's the tricky part, because, often, in the business operations, we'll just go, look, we want to do this. And, engineers love building things. But you've somehow got to bring them back to, well, what's the benefit of building? And so, we changed that project quite significantly when I was there, based on the kind of the economic returns. But we got that out, and eventually that became a company called Aquanet. And interestingly, Gemini, who bought AGL, they just sold that about a year ago for about $100 million. So it was just interesting to see. I'd been on that very early stage of setting that business up, and then watching it, it grown over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, and was sold to, I think, the Canadian pension fund, something. After AGL, and AGL was interesting because I obviously went through that, when they divested into two businesses. AGL at that stage was the oldest public company in Australia, and it obviously had some very attractive infrastructure assets, and a lot of the banks circled around AGL at that stage. And it was a bizarre period, because it was such a big deal, and it was just being involved in something, that transition, where, literally for a couple of months, the employees just sort of sat around because, we were told that's all we had to do until the new owners came in. I, at that stage, then left and went to global engineering and project delivery. And again, it was the same thing. It was the finance skills that I had, but also, understanding technology and being able to work with, engineering people was also, critical. And, I was the first hire in. It was a senior role. It was a head of commercial, reporting to the executive general manager of power and energy, and with a dotted line into the CFO. And it was really to manage the sort of the commercial and financial activities of the business unit. And so that was obviously, interesting. Did M&A, again, small, bolt-on M&As to improve the capabilities of SKM. And then I was moved into group strategy as we were looking to sell the business to what eventually turned out to be Jacobs. And so I went through that process. And interesting, my role became developing the no sale business case. And so I had to build the 5-year plan about what we would be doing in the event that we didn't sell the business. Because it was at that stage, there was obviously, again, a lot going on in those markets, the commodity markets, the infrastructure markets, the power and energy markets around the world. And so I worked with the business across the 5 business units globally on what our strategy would be, and which geographies that we would invest in, and which capabilities that that we would invest in, and that all sort of fed back into a financial model that also helped to inform the shareholders of what's the value of the business, how can we talk ourselves up when we are talking to the people that want to buy us. And so that was a really interesting take on M&A, working on the other side that sort of says, well, let's assume we don't go, we've still got to figure out what we think our value is worth. And so we did that. We obviously did that very well, and they got a very good sale to the Americans. And it was, again, my job was the kind of things that I did. It was a very American company where all of the corporate roles were done in the head office, and the regions were really strictly operational. And so I looked and I thought, well, I don't want to do anything here, and I don't want to go to Pasadena to work. So I kind of took the opportunity to move out. And that was where I set up Grace Papers with my wife, which is a gender equality consulting and technology business. And that was, built around everything that was going on in gender equality, 10 years ago, and a need in the market to help organisations, I guess, optimise their gender equality outcomes. And, doing that initially through helping the pregnancy transitions and the challenges that were experienced, actually not by just women, but by men also in the discrimination space, in terms of taking time off and coming back to work, and broadening that to include caring responsibilities, because at the end of the day, pregnancy is just a form of flexibility, as is caring for a sick child or elderly parents. Organisations just have to figure out how they work flexibly. And so we built a technology platform that collects, a huge amount of data, we feed that data back in the aggregate level to the organisations to help them understand, their policy settings and their cultural settings, if you like. That's been a huge part of my life, and that was, we did a capital raise to the high net worth market when we started that, and then in the meantime, I sort of did a couple of years of that, and then I went back into telecoms, and and again, we obviously know the telecom market, the ICT market, has been undergoing incredible transformation over the last sort of five or so years, probably even 10 years. And it's not stopping. I rolled up 4 small companies into a micro cap and listed on the ASX. We raised, sort of $10 million of a $40 million valuation. And I literally went out and spoke to all the firms and pulled a deal together with a guy that was an advisor. And we went to a broker and went through the listing process. And that was a 6-7 month process. Torturous, but again, when you look back on it now, you kind of, rang the bell in the ASX in Melbourne, did all that sort of stuff, and ran the business through the first couple of years. And interestingly, through that, I consolidated the Melbourne businesses into Sydney. We created our office in Sydney, and so I was flying to Sydney every week in the end. And I guess part of my problem, when we set the business up, we had got the corporate governance wrong. And so we had a board that was not independent. And so while we put an independent chairman in and non-executive director, we put 3 vendors on the board. And so we had some challenges with one of the businesses, and it got very, very messy at the board level. I wasn't able to do the job that I was, wanting to do, and had put forward through the prospectus, and the chairman was trying to support me, but couldn't. He just couldn't. In the end, it was too much, and so I stepped out of that and set up SDX Ventures. And so I've been, building my time between SDX Ventures and Grace Papers. Grace Papers has had quite a significant growth, and we've been sort of really building out our data analytics infrastructure and capability over the last 12 months. Because clients now, it's really become a standard. All clients want to understand what your data analytics capability is. So I've been working with some consultants to build out our framework and, learning about SQL databases and about cloud and a whole lot of things. And as I said, I set up SDX Ventures. I'm working with my business partner. That is a guy that's come from the advisory market, the telecom advisory market, over the last 30 years. And there is just incredible opportunity. We're building a cloud network managed service provider, and so we're working with a couple of companies to invest in, and then build a company to scale across Asia Pacific. Again, all of the finance just is one of the things that keeps coming back to me. Just the skills that you learned, are just super relevant in being able to understand a business case. And it's not just, I think, as you said, it's one thing to build a financial model. It's another thing to present it to a board and to be able to get them to understand in 3 very easy steps, what the opportunity is, why it makes sense, and how we quantified the economics of it. And if you cannot get that done very succinctly, you won't get it passed. And that is probably one of the really overlooked parts of that investment decision process, is being able to communicate it to the people above or to the investors so that they can understand it. Because no matter how much you believe in what you're doing, no matter how well you've worked on the business case, if you can't get the investors to understand that, you're not going to get anywhere. It's really important, which I think is why the Capstone subject is really useful, because it actually, I think when you start to look at things that are just outside of your capability, that sort of stuff is going to be really useful when you become more senior in your career. Because it's when you have finances, you kind of take it, oh, you've got the finance, go tick, you've got the master of finance, great, so you know how it all works. So tell me about the value. And they won't go to the operations people to ask them about that, because they'll just say, yeah, it's great, because they want to do it. when you're in that, you're running the business case and you're making the investment decisions, they really want to see how the value is created, and also how you have articulated that value capture in your business plan. And I can remember in the back in the early days of Optus, IT infrastructure was, Optus spent billions of dollars on billing systems and provisioning systems, and we had business cases that were getting done on business benefits, that were sort of around productivity gains, and they'd all been done in isolation. And I was asked to sort of pull all these business plans together and have a look at them, and we kind of figured out that everyone had been putting all these business impacts, saying, oh, we'll get 5% uplift in productivity. And we added up and said, well, if we do this, then we're going to make another $1 billion because of all of the productivity gains. And we kind of realised that we hadn't really had a kind of strategic view of all of those gains. They were all unrealistic. Yeah. And said about, well, how do we do this correctly and really get the rigor around understanding the benefits that are being delivered. So that's super important, because that's when you speak to investors, people that have been in the investment markets for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they really know how to think. They really understand, where value is captured, and to understand what sort of businesses they need to invest in to get the sort of returns that they're looking for. And so it's being able to articulate and communicate to those sorts of people is really where you get the value. So, I think the Capstone is great in that regard, that you get to do that by presenting back to a group of people, and hear their say.
Can I just ask there? I mean, in terms of the things that you've done, do you think that if you had done one of those Capstone units in your Master of Applied Finance, that would have actually helped with where you ended up going?
I think, absolutely, because I think that what I did was I took the long path effectively through experience, and that's one thing. Experience is one thing, but it's not to understate how important it is actually to engage in new learning and how that can help you in your career. And I think it would have helped me better to position myself and what I was capable of doing in the earlier stages of my career. What I think experience gives you is probably a bit of confidence, and sometimes you say, like, I would have liked to have had a bit more confidence maybe a bit earlier in my career, and the app thing certainly gave that to me. But I think those sorts of programs, it helps you, in terms of your own confidence in going back into an organisation, because it's very scary if you go into if you're presenting a business case internally and you don't know how to do it. It can be a very harrowing experience.
Yes.
Fortunately, there was had a lot of very good people around me, and that I was able to learn off. But it's a process that you go through.
No, it is. Thank you for that. And sorry, I did interrupt you when you were about to say something else, so I apologise for that.
No, look, I think the only other, I guess, things I would say on my career is, really, I mean, again, what the Masters of Applied Finance really gives you is a real ability to read analytically, and so kind of what I, once you've studied options and hedging and all those, that were beyond me. I was just a corporate finance kind of guy, but it gives you some real mental agility to be able to start to read it, read broadly, and read, non-fiction and some, economic, I did a lot of reading on, economic theory and, global economics. And I got that just out of doing the applied finance, because I was really crunching my brain through that time. And I got out the other end of it, and I needed something to do in my spare time. So I took up, a fair bit of reading. You also learn, you never stop learning. That's the thing I would say. And, I've probably even reinvented myself, in a way in the last few years, just around technology, because it's no longer, I think, good enough to say, well, we all want to get into technology, but you've also got to make sure that you've got some credibility behind that. And obviously I've worked in the technology space for a long time, but it's still changed. So I've got my, AWS certified a cloud consultant. I'm doing my AWS Certified Solutions Architect, which means that I can design, AWS clouds for organizations. I'm learning JavaScript. I'd encourage everyone to learn a language, a computer language. JavaScript is about as broad as you can get. If you want to learn a computer programming language, JavaScript, because it's the foundation of the internet. I've learned how to use SQL databases. I understand the differences between SQL databases, and data warehouses. And I'm finding these days that I'm using, learning platforms like Udemy and a Cloud Guru and the Cloud Academy, because it's, there's almost been this, like the way you learn it has changed immensely, because there's now so much information that is put through these learning platforms, so you can get on and actually learn about databases or learn about big data. And again, the AppFin is a great course to also lean into big data. If they're obviously the fields that are big data, AI, all these things. Somebody has kind of got a proven capability to handle very complex things. And it's the same complexity that you get in those technology spaces. So if you can learn about derivatives and all of the things that you learn about, you can learn about, the basics of artificial intelligence or machine learning or how clouds work, so that you have the proper conversations. And once you start to talk the language of some of those industries, that's where you really separate yourselves, not only with the AppFin, but also that you're not just a finance person that doesn't understand industry. You're a finance person that really, understands, and I think that makes you a really powerful combination.
I agree. It does. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I can keep talking, but I don't know.
I did have a couple of questions, and a couple of them, there's a really sort of very prosaic one, which is, I know it was a long time ago, but how did you find the workload doing the MAPFin and working at the same time? Because it's a frequent question.
Look, and it's a good one, and it's something people ask me, and I have to admit, I started family later in life, and so when I was working full time and studying, I actually had the luxury of, basically I was single and I was living in Sydney, and so what it did was it put a big dent into my social life. And that was a big impact.
Yep.
That was the impact for me. I look at people who have got kids now. I think, wow, that's hard studying. People who are studying MBAs and Master Applied Finance with kids, it's hard. I think you've got to have really clear communication with your partner and your workplace about what you're doing, because you've kind of got to stop yourself from burning the candle at both ends, because it goes for such a long time. So you've just got to figure out when is time for study and when's time for work. And sometimes you can study, a bit at work, and you've got to take advantage of all of that flexibility that you have to be able to pursue something. Because after all, if you're doing something like this, it's a real benefit for your employer as well. And so, they should be working with you to help you get through, particularly, if you've got family or people that you need to care for.
I have to say, having done it myself, that negotiating with your kids is also very important. No, daddy can't go and play with you.
No, yeah, absolutely. That really is. Yeah. And they don't get it, They don't get it. So you've got to figure out how you
got to balance it.
That.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for that. And I did have one more question, which is sort of relates back to your AGL and engineering days. Did the idea of stranded assets come up much then, given that they are now very prominent?
I did. We started talking about it then, and the stranded assets, it was really interesting, because when we built NextGen, what had happened was that they had effectively built a stranded asset, because you actually still need a last mile connectivity to get there. And so there was a whole challenge. Well, how do we, because that's still another expenditure that you've kind of got to go through. Where it first really came in for me, and I must admit back then, look, you know, you kind of go, oh, yeah, stranded assets, so what? The telecom market, it's a boom. We'll work our way through it. When I was at SKM, so the Global Energy and Project Delivery, I was working on, you know, a big oil and gas investment. So SKM was looking to, you know, enter the oil and gas market. So they originally done that through the very big power, the gas projects that happen in Queensland and Western Australia. And so they obviously got core engineering positions on sort of the pre-feasibility and the feasibility studies of those projects. And they were enormous. And so they wanted to figure out how they could leverage their own capabilities for non-process infrastructure around gas plants here in other parts of the world. And then we moved into looking at how do we get fairly into the oil and gas market. And we had one of the consultants, Booz, come in, and they did put a slide in about this notion of market failure and the stranded assets. And, you know, it was the first time we really looked at what could cause market failure here, or what could cause the assets to be stranded. And we did that. And again, you know, it was a different time back then. It was particularly oil and gas. You look at the gas price. And so while you had it there, I don't think we really believed it, because it was just, you know, the gas price was like, you know, $100, $200 or whatever. And everyone just making so much money that we didn't kind of have that. But I think nowadays, I think it's a very different environment. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, you really have to look at. And again, it's the other side of valuations where everyone sort of looks at what's going up. But actually what I found in my career was I probably learned more when things were going bad. And I said I went to NextGen, that, you know, which they'd sort of spent $1 billion building fibre, and the market had come off significantly in the telecom market at that stage. And you know, the board was comprised of you know, the equity banks, UBS, Macquarie, Deutsche, Australian Super, and on the debt side it was Deutsche Bank, Macquarie Bank. You know, when it wasn't going right, you know, particularly the debt bankers were very serious, and they were very intense, and it made for a really challenging time. But actually, I got through 18 months of that, and I learned so much more about business in that period than I had in the previous 10 years. You know, where you were riding that bubble, and everyone was just making money and not having to worry about investments because you were going to get a return. To suddenly being challenged, and you know, they are, you know, through my working life, don't be afraid to, you know, take a punt on something. You know, and I would also, you know, so that's part of, you know, not fearing failure, but if you fail, you've got to fail fast and learn quickly. And that's the thing that people look for. You know, people don't look for, oh, you failed. They look that you've understood why you failed and what you would do differently.
Yeah, and what you learned from that, exactly.
Yeah, what you learned from that, yeah.
Well, we do actually have some questions here. There's some really good ones, and there's actually one that I'll probably have to answer, but we will move to that. Please post your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. The first one we'll get is from an anonymous person, which is, thank you for sharing your very diverse corporate background. What advice would you provide to younger professionals who are currently going through the MAPFin, who are looking to land a lucrative position after graduating? You kind of partially answered that already, but anything more you want to add?
Look, I think that's the challenge for people, is to understand. So the part about everyone wants to find a lucrative thing, right? You know, and the advice that I would give my youngest self would be to understand kind of my professional vision, understand what I was really interested in doing, and sort of what my values were, and then pursue something in that vein. So, you know, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I want to go work in a startup, you know, because it'd be awesome. You know, I just want to do the startup thing. And my view is that startups, you don't go and work in a startup. Startups happen because somebody is challenged by something and they're so passionate about fixing the problem that they come up with a solution, and they then set about, you know, their life maybe, you know, solving the problem and making the world a better space, for example, you know. But it's grounded in something that they're passionate about, and that aligns with their values. And that's the trick to finding something that you're going to love to do, and that's going to have a financial return if that's what's driving you, or a social justice return or whatever. It's finding what you've got to get that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding that connection is always the hardest part. And that's actually something where we find a lot of our students get so much out of their capstone project, because they're the ones that turn that into something that they can develop and become their purpose, which is fantastic. Okay, I've got another good one here. Based on your thanks, Emma says, thank you, Ben. Based on your experience, how can we take advantage of the learning to get the most?
Well, again, I don't know. I mean, when you say get the most, again, you've been given a really, really powerful platform, and you've been given, knowledge that a lot of people don't have. And so, I mean, it's corny, but you've kind of got to go out there and make it happen, yourself. Your career is very much in your hands. And so again, it's kind of, do you go to pie in the sky where I think, I want to go and be an equity derivatives trader and make $1 million? Okay, well, go for it. There's a lot of people that might want to do that. What do you really want to do? It gets back to what do you really want to do, and augment the knowledge that you have, with the industries that you want to participate in. Learn about them. Learning is probably the constant that you'll have over your career. Just being able to learn, and if you really believe in something, go and do something. I mean, I've, in my even though I've been in telecoms for a long time, still for me doing the AWS cloud and the cloud architecture, and I'm doing my Cisco CCNA, which is the best certification. So that gives me credibility again, because I know how to talk to network architects and CIOs about their networks and how they manage their networks. And it's, you kind of go, well, it's that technology, people want to be in that technology space, but you've still got to do something to prove that you're really motivated to do it. And the Master of Applied Finance is a great cornerstone, it's a great foundation to really figure out where you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Anonymous is busy. Thanks, Ben, for the great insights. You mentioned that the finance world has changed. Can you elaborate on what has changed from what you observe? And what's your view on applied finance? What exactly is applied finance? Thanks.
Good question. I think what has changed, when I first started in telecoms, the great thing, it was a really great, the 90s was fantastic because you could invest money and no one really worried about making money, because the valuation models were built on multiples of, you figure, well, you're not making, well, let's go up from net profit to EBITDA, let's go to operating profit, let's go to, revenue multiples. And, there was no, but these days it's changed. I mean, we have, the market's so tight now, interest rates. I mean, who would have thought in the early 2000s that, cash rates would be at 0% and that you could get credit so available for so long at that, like, completely different world. So, I think what has changed has been the sources of finance that are in the market. So if the public listing was a way of getting money, I think these days the private equity markets are really, there's just so much money coming into interesting ventures and businesses through that private market. And that private market is so different, the different stages of investment, the funds that are coming in with their mandates, where they're wanting to invest. So the sources of funding, I think, has really opened up. And, versus, if you go in the 90s, it wasn't, venture capital wasn't really associated with kind of that sort of corporate investing. But, these days with KKR and the big venture capital firms and private equity firms, they're doing really big things and using the capital markets, so the public markets, as the kind of the exit. So the funding sources have changed in that regard, I think.
They certainly have. And in fact, someone, Dave Simmons, has asked whether you see the opportunities and under the current fluid situation, and he's interested in private equity. And I would say that is an area where there has been enormous growth. And the private equity, I mean, we changed our private equity unit to be private capital, because private equity is not just private equity anymore. It's going, it is including lending. Like, people get their credit from private sources these days as well. So it's changing enormously, and it is definitely an area where there's a lot of growth.
Mm.
But what is different is you're not just looking at a pure valuation of a business. It's broader. It's like you've got to understand the products. You've got to understand how it all works.
Yes.
So it's the breadth of it has changed enormously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so going back to that question, what do you think applied, the applied and applied finance mean? I mean, I know what I think it means, but I'm interested in what you.
I think it's. I mean, I kind of take it literally. It's a kind of it's the application of finance in the real world, where if that whether it be in the financial markets, in the industrial markets, whatever technology markets, it's the application of finance in the real world. And I think that's where it really takes off, is where you can you can relate it into the markets and use it to understand how it's done.
And that's a point that Kenneth James makes, is, he always finds there's a gap between coursework and the real corporate stuff. And, you've given your take there. And I'd probably add to that by saying that, in a lot of cases, pure postgraduate finance in a general sense tends to be an extension of undergraduate work and can be quite theoretical. Yeah. And the intention in our degrees and in our courses is to make sure that it is applicable to real corporate stuff. So we will go and look at things that are happening, and certainly in our units, if something's happening in the market, we will use it during the course. We'll actually look at what's happening.
And that was really, again, like, we didn't have the capstone, but we had the, you had 4 core subjects, and we had 8 or 12, electives. And they were really useful. We sat down in the, valuations with a practitioner that, worked in the markets. We sat down and did private equity with a private equity, but so it was a really great connection into people who were applying those skills. Mm. So there's a lot you can learn from, the lecturers in the courses, and, asking them questions, and, I actually got so much out of those, being able to choose and just do so many electives, and really pick and look at and understand and figure out what you liked, and you can then study a bit more in that space. It was really good.
It is fantastic, that ability to learn from practitioners, and that's one of the things that is a hallmark of this course. Yeah. We do have a couple of other good questions, and I'm conscious that we're running out of time, so I'll try and get to them all. So Ben, someone asked, given your experience with AGL, what are your views on the future of Australia's energy mix? Good one.
Look, it's a good one. It's been quite interesting, because it's been such a long time since I've been out of the energy markets. But what I would say is, it's a challenge for Australia, because we're grounded in some pretty fundamental resources, and we've got to figure out how to kind of work that in. I think that we've tried to build the national electricity market, and really, I think it's been a failure. I don't think there is a real interconnection of electricity networks. Otherwise, we wouldn't be experiencing just the kind of the performance that we have in various markets. That hasn't worked. Look, the answer is I don't know. We are in a kind of a political environment that will never be able to solve it, because they're just election cycle based. And I guess some of the corporates are getting, AGL was saying that they're making a real stance to try and go green and change their mix of energy. I don't know. A guy I used to work with at SCAM, Nick Fleming, he's actually written a book that would apply to everyone, and I haven't got it here, but he was one of the first chief sustainability officers in Australia in the early 2000s. He has got some incredible thinking on the energy mix, so I'd recommend you go and Google him.
Nick Fleming.
Read some of the world energy markets produce some really interesting reports. There's plenty of information that you can read to form a view on the energy markets. I've just been out of it for too long My view is more back around 2013, 14, 15, when it was a different world, when iron ore was at $150, and it is now, but the gas and oil and gas prices were right up. So no, it was a very different environment. And the values also, community values also were only just forming. There's a lot of community input into energy policy as well. It's complex.
Excellent, thank you. Michael Dewar asks, is risk management more or less important in the current strategic environment and into the future?
I think risk management is one of the big, I think, macro thesis that everyone's going to be running on. I think what people have realised is that we really haven't had the risk management right.
Yeah.
Inside of organisations, I think it's probably one of the most important subjects you can study if you get grounded in risk management. That is, boards are. I think Australian boards still haven't got their heads around risk management. It's still a really tricky subject, and particularly as you get into the kind of the ASX market where there's a long tail of companies. So we've got like some big companies, but we've got a huge tail of very small organisations that don't necessarily get the look in from ASIC as much as they probably should. And there's a space in that mid-small part of the market that really is struggling with risk and how they manage it at the board level. But yeah, it's a super important subject. I think it's one of the really big challenges of our time.
Thank you. And look, there's a few other questions I'll run through quite quickly here, which are kind of for me. Someone asked, how does the course delivered online work? And obviously this is very different to what you experienced, Ben. Ben slaved like a lot of us through, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. We have actually changed the course so that it can work online. So it now takes place over the 10 weeks. There's an element of self-study. There's an element of tasks that you have to do. And then there's also some online Zoom sessions. And then there's a hybrid class on weekends. So you can choose to do that online, or you can come into the classroom. It's entirely up to you. Now, that's in normal times. At the moment, obviously, we're not doing that because Sydney's in lockdown. But that's the intention, and that's how we anticipate that will work in the future. And certainly we want to make sure that we can deliver a high quality course no matter whether you're online or not. And that includes actually networking. So making sure that people get the chance to work with each other and get the chance to connect with their fellow students.
And that's I reckon a really important thing there, the networking, because I know people say, well, what about we're going to land the next big job? Well, actually, you got to take a 20-year view as well and say that these are my colleagues and that we're all going to be somewhere in 20 years' time. In 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, all the way through. That networking is really important. There's a lot of MAPFin graduates working, and they all know how powerful, and they all know the rigor that you've gone through and the sacrifice that you've made to get the degree. They'll be your friends.
Exactly, and it sort of goes to the question that Thomas asked, which is what type of job profiles can we aim with this executive course? I mean, I'd say look at Elizabeth Gaines at FMG, look at Rob Scott at Wesfarmers, look at Wayne Byers, who's the chairman of APRA. They're all graduates. So, you can aim wherever you want with this. And there are your number of people that have gone on to do different things. And just for your guide, the executive in charge of the digital yuan in China is a graduate of the Master of Applied Finance. So it can take you almost anywhere. It's really a case of whatever you want to do. And I think, Ben, you're a great example of what you can do and leverage this degree to do. Shannon also asked, is this course suitable for people already in the banking industry? I have a finance degree, but no postgraduate. I would say absolutely yes. If you have a finance degree, you have a great foundation in theory, but this is your chance. This degree is your chance to actually apply it to larger things, to more complex things, to projects and businesses that you probably wouldn't have covered as much in your finance degree, and certainly not with practitioners as well, which is a really big thing. that we aim to do, to make sure that you've got realistic examples with people who've done it.
Mm.
And then finally, for students who don't want to take on the MATFin straight away, what can we do? Can we do professional courses as we wish? Now, as Ben mentioned, you know, there's your number of courses out there to help you gain skills. And we're also taking part in that. We have a lot of micro-credentials either happening now or on the way. For anyone who's aware of it, the Australian Financial Markets Association accreditation, we provide, you know, the financial market certificate, which is the basis for that. And that then can be actually leveraged into the Master of Applied Finance. We want to make sure that people can actually gain experience without necessarily starting that MATFin straight away, but give you the ability to use those micro-credentials and the courses that you do to be able to build that into your Master of Applied Finance later if you need to. So very happy to have that question. And as has been pointed out in the chat, more than happy to take additional questions after this, either via the consultation sessions, or you can even just go straight to the student services or the future students team to ask those questions, and we're more than happy to we're more than happy to answer those. So what I'd like to do now is to say thanks to Ben. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for your insights and for giving us that map of your career path. We hope it goes continues along the same trajectory. Best of luck with all the work that you're doing now. Thank you very much to all the people that came along today. And I think we have just a little link, I think it is, for the, if we've got that yet. So we've got the one-on-one consultations are up in the chat. So please, if you want to make that booking, please go into the chat and go to that link. Once again, everyone, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for your questions. Thanks, Ben. And we'll see you all soon. Look forward to seeing your applications. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.
I'll
Thanks,
speak
everyone.
to you afterwards.